In the summer of 2019, at an Under-20 World Cup match in Poland, a 19-year-old Norwegian striker scored 9 goals in a single game against Honduras, a record that still stands in the tournament's history, achieved before most of the football world had learned to spell his name. That name was Erling Braut Haaland, and within 3 years he would be lifting the Champions League trophy as the most feared finisher on the planet. What they never tell you about Erling Haaland's rise. He was born in Leeds, England, in July 2000, the son of Erling Haaland, a Norwegian midfielder who had spent years grinding through the English leagues, including a spell at Leeds United itself. But England was never meant to be home. When Erling was still a toddler, the family returned to Bryne, a small town on the windswept southwestern coast of Norway, a place of sheep farms and quiet streets, about as far from the glamour of European football as one could imagine. It was here, on the same pitches where his father had once played, that Erling first touched a ball, and it was here that something in him was set in motion that no one, not even his father, could have fully predicted. Erling never pushed his son toward football the way so many footballing fathers do. Instead, he let the boy chase it himself, and chase it he did, obsessively, restlessly, with a hunger that local coaches at Bryne FK would later describe as unlike anything they had seen in a child that age. He was not the most gifted technician on those youth pitches. He was something rarer. A boy who refused to stop running, who treated every training session like a final, who seemed to understand, even before he had the words for it, that talent without ferocity was worthless. By his mid-teens, the whispers had begun to spread beyond Bryne. He was tall for his age, gangly, still growing into a frame that would eventually make him look less like a football player and more like a specimen built in a laboratory for the sole purpose of scoring goals. In 2017, at just 16, he signed for Molde FK, then managed by Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, the Norwegian legend who had once terrorized defenses for Manchester United. Solskjaer saw something immediately, not just the raw pace and the physical tools, but a mentality, a coldness in front of goal that belied his age. Under Solskjaer's guidance, Haaland's development accelerated. He made his senior debut, then his goals began arriving in bursts, and the Norwegian top flight, a competition rarely scouted by Europe's giants, suddenly had eyes on it because of one teenager in Molde's yellow shirt. The breakthrough that announced him to the wider world came not in a league match but on that international stage in Poland, in that U20 World Cup demolition of Honduras, when 9 goals in 90 minutes turned a promising prospect into a name that scouting departments across the continent could no longer ignore. The move that followed was calculated rather than dazzling. In January 2019, Haaland joined Bull Salzburg in Austria, a club with a reputation for developing young talent at ferocious speed and selling it on at even greater profit. It was the perfect environment for a player who needed minutes, needed responsibility, and needed to be thrown into senior football without the suffocating pressure of a global superclub. He did not disappoint. He scored on his debut. He scored in the Champions League against Genk within minutes of coming on as a substitute, and then did it again and again until Europe's traditional giants, Manchester United, Juventus, Real Madrid, and others, were reportedly circling a teenager who had barely played a full season of senior football outside Norway. Then came Dortmund. In January 2020, in the dead of the European winter transfer window, Borussia Dortmund secured his signature, activating a release clause and beating out clubs with far deeper pockets, a decision widely credited to his father and his agent steering him toward a club known for developing young stars into the world's most coveted talents. The response was almost cinematic in its own right. On his debut for Dortmund, coming on as a substitute against Augsburg, Haaland scored a hat-trick inside 20 minutes. It was as if the football gods themselves wanted to make a statement. This was not hype. This was inevitability. Over the following 2.5 seasons in Dortmund's black and yellow, Haaland became one of the most clinical strikers Europe had witnessed in a generation, scoring at a rate that statisticians struggled to contextualize against historical comparisons. He helped Dortmund win the DFB Pokal in 2021, terrorized Bundesliga defenses week after week, and became a fixture on Champions League highlight reels. His combination of explosive pace, aerial power, and ruthless composure in the box making him nearly indefensible one-on-one with a goalkeeper. But Dortmund, for all its history and passion, was always understood to be a stepping stone, and in the summer of 2022, the trajectory that had begun on a sheep farm in Bryne reached its most consequential turn. Erling Haaland signed for Manchester City, joining a squad built by Pep Guardiola, a manager whose tactical philosophy had rarely, in over a decade at the top level, revolved around a single, traditional-style striker. Many wondered whether Haaland's game, built on directness, pace in behind, and predatory instinct would even fit inside Guardiola's intricate, possession-based machine. The doubts evaporated almost instantly. In his very first season in England, Haaland did not just adapt to the Premier League, he rewrote it. He shattered the record for most goals scored in a single 38-game Premier League season, finishing with 36 league goals, a mark that had stood for decades and that many believed was untouchable in the modern, more tactically cautious era of the sport. He claimed the Premier League Golden Boot in his debut campaign, an almost unthinkable achievement for a player new to the league's unique physical and tactical demands. And the individual brilliance translated directly into collective glory. That same 2022-23 season, Manchester City completed an unprecedented treble for an English club, capturing the Premier League title, the FA Cup, and, for the first time in the club's history, the UEFA Champions League. Haaland was the tournament's top scorer in that Champions League campaign, his goals propelling City through a knockout run that had eluded Guardiola's project for years, including a demolition of Real Madrid in the semi-final that many considered the definitive statement of his arrival among football's true elite. To lift the Champions League trophy in his very first season at the club, at just 22 years old, placed him instantly among a small fraternity of players who had conquered Europe's most prestigious competition before their mid-20s. What followed was not a plateau but a continuation of the same relentless standard. Season after season, Haaland kept scoring at a rate that defied the normal attrition curve of elite strikers, kept adding league titles and domestic honors to a trophy cabinet that, by his mid-20s, already rivaled players a decade or more into their careers. Off the pitch, his reputation for near-monastic discipline became almost as famous as his goals themselves: meticulous sleep tracking, cold water immersion therapy, a diet regimented down to the gram, all overseen in close coordination with his father, who remained one of the most influential voices in his career even as his son became one of the wealthiest and most marketable athletes in world sport. In 2024, Manchester City secured his long-term future at the club with a new contract, a signal that both player and institution viewed their partnership as the foundation for years of continued dominance rather than a fleeting purple patch. Yet for all his club success, one thread of his story has remained stubbornly unresolved: Norway. Despite Haaland's individual brilliance, the Norwegian national team spent much of his career searching for the kind of tournament qualification that would let the world see him on football's biggest international stages, a gap between personal greatness and national glory that has added a layer of very human tension to an otherwise dominant career. Today, Erling Haaland stands as arguably the most feared pure goalscorer in world football, a player whose statistical output has forced pundits and historians to recalibrate what is considered possible for a modern striker. He is often spoken of in the same breath as the sport's most clinical finishers of any era, not because of flair or trickery, but because of a terrifying, almost mechanical efficiency in front of goal, built on a foundation laid on a quiet pitch in Bryne, refined under Salzburg and Molde, sharpened in Salzburg and Dortmund, and unleashed, fully formed, upon the Premier League. His story is still being written, but its trajectory already reads like a blueprint for how a boy from a town of sheep farmers became the most clinical predator the modern game has produced.